Hey Jeff, how are you doing today?
Good, Jeff. Good to be with you.
Likewise, always good to talk with another Jeff. I think you're probably maybe a bit older than me, but it seemed like I'm a child of the late '80s, and it seems like every one out of every five kids was named Jeff from that time, and the name's gone down in popularity, but I still think it's a solid name.
Right? Jeff Bridges, Jeff Lebowski, right? It gets good.
That's funny. My coworker quotes that movie all the time.
Right?
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a classic. How we're just coming back from Thanksgiving weekend. How was your holiday break?
Oh, it was awesome. It was awesome. I have a 21-year-old now coming back from college, so I'm having to get back in shape with going out to the bars and hanging out with 21-year-old. Yeah, a little slower recovery these days at this age than it used to be, but lots of fun. So I had a really good
Um,
holiday.
the self control is probably a bit up. The ability to handle is down, but the self control's up. Maybe I don't know.
Exactly. But lots of fun. It's great having a kid at this age now,
That's
and
awesome.
kind of empty nester. So, I get to kind of kick back and let the parent responsibilities go and just enjoy.
That's so fun. That sounds awesome. I've got my oldest is a 7 year old, so a little bit earlier on in the journey,
Yeah,
but
yeah. Lots ahead. Lots ahead. These are the best years, though. Enjoy them while you can. They
that's
go
awesome.
fast.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, already I was just thinking about, man, 7 years. It's just like, where did that go? It's crazy.
Right? Yeah.
It's
And the
so
next seven, and the seven after they just go faster and faster. So grab those moments
so
while you
you
can.
were, yeah, amazing. You were telling me about how your company just recently went through acquisition. Tell us about that. Sounds super interesting.
Yeah, it's my second successful exit in 3 years as a head of sales and business development. I was in the digital marketing technology space for about 8, 9 years and had a team of 16. We were acquired by a competitor, and that was a really interesting experience. Learned a lot,
Interesting.
and didn't really land quite as comfortably as I wanted to. And then I had a
Mm,
chance to pivot into the climate tech space, and I joined an early stage startup, and had a chance to come in, double Xed our ARR, kind of positioned us as well, and we just went through it as well. In this case, we're kind of the last piece in the jigsaw puzzle that they were looking. They've been going through a lot of acquisitions, kind of filling out. It's a company called ISS, where we were Sustainabase, just acquired by them, but they've been around for decades in the corporate governance, cyber risk, compensation,
mm,
sustainability realms. But they were really putting together more of a complete solution, and we've kind of filled that jigsaw puzzle out. So this has been really pleasant just to kind of come in and provide what we do as sort of a complement as opposed to being a competitor. It's been a really pleasant experience so far, and really just going through it right now. And again, that's head of sales. Is what you try to help your
yeah,
founders, right? Is get that successful exit. So it's been a great experience.
that's so cool. I love to hear that. So tell me a little bit. Climate tech, super interesting space that probably not a lot of people are familiar with. Would love to hear just a little bit about what the company does and who you sell to.
Yeah, ESG, which been bandied about. Some people don't like that word so much, depending on what your political leanings
Yeah.
are. But really, environmental social governance, right? And it's about a little shy of $1 billion market right now. The compound annual growth rate is expected to be about 17, 18%. So, what's $1 billion industry now is expected to be about a $3 billion industry by the end of the decade. So, huge growth potential. Basically companies are really grappling with sustainability metrics, right? And mostly to
Right.
do with carbon. So they got to measure their carbon footprint. They've got to look at reduction strategies. If you're in California, there's regulations, right? If you do business in California, if you do business in Europe, those are kind of, if you remember the privacy, right?
Yeah.
GDPR,
Yeah. Well, we
CCPA.
deal with that a lot.
That's exactly the environmental area is really following that model. So if you're in
Right.
Europe, you measure your carbon footprint. If you're in California, you got to do the same. So companies are really
Interesting.
grappling with how to do that, and there's a lot of software solutions that help. Just like software always does, helps you save time and effort, do things more efficiently, and get the job done. So it's an exciting
So
space to be in, and pivoted here last year.
interesting. So I imagine there's some with the companies that are sort of bound by these regulations are at a certain size, or so these generally enterprise sales.
Typically, yeah. In California, you have to do 500 million in annual sales to trip the first regulation, and then a
Okay.
billion in sales to trip the second. In Europe, there's going to be less of a
Interesting.
Pretty much every company in Europe is going to have to do it, but typically larger enterprise organizations, of course, if you're selling software, enterprise SaaS, you got to have enough people where saving time and effort and doing all that, it makes it worth it, right? Some
Yeah,
companies get
totally.
this done with a spreadsheet. They don't need a lot of help, but the larger the organization, the more complex the problem.
And so, what was your go-to-market motion to reach these customers?
Yeah, typical enterprise SaaS, right? You've got to develop a really good marketing, outreach. In when I came to Sustainabase, the first step there was verticalization, right? Focusing on the 7 verticals that we really focused, that we were going to impact the best. Of course, backing that up with a really good business development strategy, reseller partnerships, as well as product partnerships, referral partnerships were key in driving warm leads in those markets. And of course, the BDR, qualifying those. Our BDRs are doing about 20 to 25 meetings, completed discovery calls a month, which is really
Wow.
high compared to where I was before.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Really driving that, qualifying that, and then of course running the sales motion, right? I'm a big fan of Bemanter, budget, methodology, authority, timeline, risk, need, all of that, as well as just really exercising some good processes. That was the opportunity to come into a company that really didn't have a lot of that expertise and bring that. So
Hmm.
running those motions, I'm a big fan of cold calling from the BDR and a big fan of really just sharpening the tech stack with all the AI capabilities that are out there and really leveraging those things to make people more efficient is really that seems to be the name of the game right now.
Right.
And in a new industry like the ESG software market, there's a lot of opportunities, I think, where it's maturing, right? It's kind of like the digital marketing tech realm was 10 years ago, a little bit of a wild, wild west, and where expertise can really, really play a.
So, so you said you kind of did a variety of strategies to set the leads for your BDRs. What were BDRs doing? Cold calling or outbound,
They were,
or are, I guess I should
and
say.
and I think like all SaaS, right? The email marketing strategy is just dying, right? I mean, the response
Yeah.
rates are
Yeah.
plummeting. So being really
Right.
creative in how you approach that market and how LinkedIn is so key, right? So
Right.
really optimizing LinkedIn, optimizing the cold call strategy, making sure we're reaching out to the right people at the right time.
Right.
Obviously, that marketing is key, being at those places where you can rub elbows, meet people in person, kind of a combination of all those things, but you got to cut through, just like in any area of SaaS, you got to cut through the noise and reach people with a need and a problem that needs to be solved. And you can get in on the early stage in this space, which is nice. So people are just waking up to this. So, and again, it's like the digital marketing was 10 years ago when people are thinking, how do I show up in Google search and what's
Right.
this?
Right. Right.
That's the way the ESG market is right now, which is an exciting space to be. People are, need a lot of information. They need to learn. They need to know what's out there, and a good chance to really, take a big chunk of the market while it's young and while they're learning.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you're primarily educating your buyers in the market versus when you're kind of explaining why your solution's better. Probably seems like you're doing a lot more of the former than the latter, right?
Yeah, it's a good point, Jeff, because we're always educating. There's
Yeah.
always new things, but in the beginning stages of a market, it's huge, right?
Yeah.
And it does, it's probably the reason why we get 20 to 25 meetings with a BDR as opposed to digital marketing, where if a BDR got 10 a month, they're killing it, right? Because
Right.
it's saturated. Companies been using, products and services for a long time, and contracts coming due, and it's a little different game than the first entry to the market where they're just trying to get out of a spreadsheet and into a software solution. But you also have to weed through the looky-loos and the people that are just using you to learn, to find the people that really have a need, or ready to move forward and solve a problem, as opposed to just learning and kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, you mentioned how you use, and I have not heard of this. Sounds like it's an expansion of Bant, but Bemanter or
Yeah,
as your methodology.
yeah, and I picked this up from a lot of the companies I was with in the digital marketing. I had really had a great opportunity to learn from some of the best of the best that had come from other really successful, all those 20 million to 100 million ARR companies and meeting people along the line that had done that. And we did
Yeah.
that at Sochi. We were an $18 million company. They were about a $20 million company. And together we became a $100 million company
Wow.
in a short period of time. But really, it's bad with R, right? Of course, you got budget, authority, need, and timeline, but
Yeah.
methodology and risk are the other two. And methodology
Interesting.
is where you really understand what's their buying process, right? And if they haven't bought
Got
this
it.
software before, you really go in, well, how did you buy something else? You bought an ERP software last year. How
Yeah.
did you do that? What happened, right? So learn, kind of understanding their methodology. And then, of course, the risk, the key question you always want to ask as a sales rep is, if you didn't do anything, if you don't solve this problem,
What's going to happen?
what's going to happen, right? And what's the risk to them, and then what's the risk to us if we don't, where is the risk in our deal? It's kind of two sides to that coin, but that's really, and I've done them all, medic and all those different methodologies, but that's the best I've found, and certainly boils it down the best, I think, to a process that you really come away with. Do I have a deal? How am I going to get the deal?
How do you use that methodology to try and filter out looky-loos or people who are not very motivated buyers? Like, what are specific tactics you do for that?
Yeah, and you can't really bite the whole apple. You got a half-hour discovery call. You're not going to, and if you end up just, what's your budget? What's your methodology? Who's it makes the
Yeah,
decision? Right?
exactly. It
You try
doesn't.
not to use it as an interview technique, but you really try to hone in on, is this a motivated buyer? Everybody's looking for pain and what's the need and all
Right.
that. Us, we would turn that into more of a driver. Right. I mean,
Mm,
everybody has a need. I'm in spreadsheets and I want to get to software. Okay, great. That's your need. But what's
right.
driving? Right? Is there a driver? And in our space, regulatory helps, right? Because there's some regulatory, where we're selling it in some cases a have to have instead of a nice to have.
Yeah. 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 A must-have.
Yeah, that's a beauty, and it could be anything. In our it could be the C level. It could be investors that want to know what you're doing. Right, a lot of investments are driven by carbon reduction and so on. So just understanding what's driving it, and then that can lead you to the timeline and so on. Because I think too many sales reps just find out there's a need, they think they have a deal, and they run through the motion. Everybody has a need, but does that need a driver? And that's, I think, what's nice about that kind of methodology is it really weeds out the high value prospects as opposed to looky-loos that you can nurture, send them back to marketing, let them nurture, focus your
Right.
sales on the deals that are going to close and build a predictable revenue engine.
Yeah, that's interesting. We use Spice at our company, which and the two things that they call it a critical event, which is kind of like a driver. It's like, what is that thing that's actually you're trying to get the deal done by? And it's not to say you can't close deals in the absence of a critical event or a compelling event, but it
Exactly.
sure helps if you have something like you said, like I need to be compliant by X date, or I just got a new boss who asked me to get this done by this time, or whatever it may be. But just trying to find like what's actually motivating them at this moment, because like you said, there's always going to be a pain or a need. The other thing that Spice also says is impact, and specifically prioritized impact. Like, why are they prioritizing that impact? Because there's a lot of people who are just casually curious, and it's like, are they actually prioritizing that impact you're trying to drive? And so there's different ways to get at it from different methodologies, but I think that core truth is there, which is it's more than just a need. Everyone has a need or everyone has a pain point that you can a good person can find any of those things, but it's like, is it prioritized, and is there some reason that or something that's forcing that prioritization?
What I love about that too, we use a mutual action plan, right? Which
Right.
obviously people do. And instead of tying it to the signing of the document, you're tying it to the result, right? It's like,
Right.
just imagine when you need to go live, when do you need to have this in place? And that could be, and our implementation could take 6 to 9 months. So if we really drive the sale toward this needs to be live and ready, then you're really talking about solving the problem. And then it's, wow, you're going to need to sign this paperwork like next quarter, right? You got to get
Yeah.
this done,
Yeah. We got
right?
to get it going.
Focusing on just the sign on the line that's dotted, which is your goal, you can really turn it more to what they need and their timeline, and then that just becomes a check the box along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine with this sell, maybe it's a new phase. What are some of the things that you're trying to figure out and work on right now? What are you trying to improve?
Yeah, I think, certainly the tech stack, right? I think everybody bought heavily in the early part of this decade, right? Everybody overbought to some degree. And so, just as I'm selling software, I'm getting sold software every day as well. And so, what are the critical tools that we need? What are the tools that are really going to move the needle and not overspend, right? Every company's
Right,
trying to
right, right.
cut costs. And so just trying to figure out, because AI obviously is never going to replace salespeople, right? We know that. We've got the most protected probably position in the universe as far as that goes, right? AI is never going to
Right,
be
right.
what a salesperson does, but it's sort of the old adage: AI is not going to replace your job, but a salesperson who can leverage AI is going to replace you if you don't figure that out, right? So
Interesting. Yeah.
that's the idea, and there's just so much hype and so much BS out there of what AI does and can do. I think that's just trying to shift through it all and say what's really relevant, what's really going to change, and make people much more efficient, get more sellers in front of their buyers,
Right.
doing what they do best, and not caught up in paperwork and filling out forms and filling out fields and
Yeah,
sales.
totally.
That's the key challenge, I think, right now.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Are there any things like what's exciting you as you're kind of diving into that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, the key, the three that I see, I think conversational intelligence, the gongs, the chorus, those type of tools, they've always been good for managers to look at. I can review a ton of calls and boil it down. Did they ask the right questions and so on? But I think the next level is now I can take the conversation, I can populate all the stuff I was going to do in Salesforce, right? I can
Right,
just
right.
so why am I filling out all these fields if now I can really start to analyze the deal and get into more of those higher level processes than the underbrush? And I'm joining a huge organization that knows it's a mess, right? And
Mm,
it's going to be really
mm.
fun to come in and help this organization because they have a whole bunch of other products outside of mine, but
Right.
they've been doing old practices for a long time and being able to really come in and help from a SaaS perspective because it's not been a SaaS company, it's a
Oh,
consulting.
right, right. Which have different sales practices
Yeah,
oftentimes.
and they're
Yeah.
building out their SaaS platform by acquisition as opposed to building it themselves, but they're buying a lot of expertise from people like me to be able
Right.
to come in. So it's not just what I've been doing, but being able to take this to a larger organization and it's just helping cut through the mustard. And again, I think there's so much inefficiency in the
Mm.
industry itself, and the companies that are going to win in a space like ESG are the ones that figure this out early on and and really capture the market with efficiency and really the value props there for everybody. But who's going to do it better? It's going to become really competitive really fast. And, there's 150 companies in our space now that we know of. There'll be 5 to 10 left in a couple of years, and who are those 5 to 10 going to be? The ones that really figure it out and do things the right way.
Right.
And again, we all have the same bells and whistles, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't come down to features, bells and whistles. Come down to process, storytelling, all those good things that you do that have always been done. Companies that do those the best are going to win.
Well, you just mentioned storytelling. That's something that you talk a lot about. I personally think it's an underappreciated sales skill. You hear a lot of things about objection handling, discovery questions, etc., but telling good stories very important. Curious what your thoughts are on storytelling as a sales skill.
Yeah, it's talked about a lot, but it's never really done. Like everybody knows
Yeah.
it's nobody knows how to do it, right?
Right.
I spent some time as a screenwriter. In fact, I don't know if you can see, but I inherited a comic strip that my great uncle John Hicks started in 1929. It was called Strange as It Seems, and he took on
Oh
Ripley,
wow.
believe it or not. And it was like taking these kind of strange, unusual things and telling a story. So I come from a long line of storytellers. I've been in the storytelling business, and I think that when you really look at it, it's a lot more than just telling a customer success story or those,
Hmm.
those
We
type of
tell,
things.
we have this customer that saved 37%. Blah blah blah. Yeah.
Some case studies, right, that are on your
Yeah.
website, which it is an important
Right.
story to tell. The key thing about those customer success stories is you have to understand that you're not the hero of the story, right? You're not
Right.
Frodo. You're not the Luke Skywalker, right? You're not Harry
Mm.
Potter. You're Dumbledore. You're Obi-Wan. You're Gandalf, right? You're the
Right.
helper, and
Right.
these guys never do anything in the story. They don't really
Mm.
they help the hero accomplish their journey. So if you
Right.
understand that that story can be a lot more effective, which is the normal story. But you've got other stories. You've got the origin story, right? How did you come about? That's always key, right?
Interesting.
Right? Then you do have the values and action stories, right? You do have the stories about, and I usually try to find people in my organization that are amazing, right? That have done, like our data engineer, he's just a wizard, right? And he's awesome. So I can tell that story about how, and that gets into your values too and your
Mm,
culture a little
mm.
bit. So you can kind of express some of that in a story. There's always the forward facing stories, the vision of what the industry is going to be down the road. That ties a little bit into your roadmap, product roadmap, but you don't want to get feature laden, but you want to talk about what you can see in the future. So there's a lot of different stories. It's not just one, or obviously the objection handling stories. Every objection has a story.
Right.
Feel, felt, found, right? This is how I know how you feel. Other people felt the same way. This is what they found, and telling those stories. But I think that, stories do amazing things. It's an emotional connection. It builds trust. It simplifies complex ideas, boils it
Right.
down, right? And it does get the value proposition across without saying what the value proposition is, because everybody says, oh, we do this and we can do that. But if you can tell a story and they can put themselves in somebody else's shoes, it's just a million times more effective. And again, everybody talks about it, but I don't see anybody doing it well. Every organization I've been at, they talk about it. They do the big presentation at, the sales kickoff every year, and we're going to do storytelling, but nobody understands it. Nobody does it.
Yeah.
You got to
It seems
write.
like it's fairy dust a little bit. It's like it's not really like a science or taught in a way that other people can replicate.
Yeah. And if you've ever written stories like screenplays or anything like that, it's hard work. Writers are the
Right.
hardest people on the planet. Right. I
Right.
mean, they get up at 4 in the morning. They work till, they work as hard as anybody. And it's not easy. It doesn't just fall out of the sky and hit them in the head. They craft these stories and they work on them. And I think, sales teams need to do the same thing. They can't just take it for granted.
So two levels there that I'd love to pull threads on. One is if I'm just a salesperson and I'd like to get better at storytelling myself in my craft as a salesperson, what are some things I can do?
Well, first, read a ton of books, right? I mean, there's
Okay.
tons out there. And not just books on sales storytelling, but just read books on storytelling.
On storytelling, yeah.
Stephen King's book on writing, awesome book. Like I could just,
Wow.
I've read it 20 times. I read it at least once a year. These great screenwriters and how they've talked about how they craft stories and build stories. Being a little broader in that sense, because there's tons of sales storytelling books, and those are great too. I think you just have to read, you have to apply, and you have to think about it all day long, and then look back over your calls. That's what's great about Gong. And like, did that story even work? Like when I look at sales reps and they're telling a story, I'm like,
Yeah, you're like, did that land at all? And you can kind of tell.
email the whole time you were telling that story. They weren't even listening. So is that working for you? That's not a good story, right? Or why?
Right.
Or how do you change that story so that the person's laughing with you or you're engaging? You got to get an emotional response out of that. And if you're not getting it, drop it. Find another story, right?
Right.
Work at it. It takes a lot of work and a lot of craft goes into it.
I love that. And then on the second level, if I'm a manager and I want to help my teams become better storytellers, what are some things you think I can do there?
Yeah, I think that's, just going over those calls, right? I think the tools like Gong and Chorus and things like that that allow you to review, and they certainly allow me to hone in where a story is told. I use a lot of keywords when I'm teaching my rep story so I can hone into where that story
Right.
was told and then go over them, right? Kickoff's a great time. Like you tell the origin story. Now you tell the origin story. Now get your founder in, have them retell the origin story again.
Mm.
It tells the story in a way, and then I take that story and I go, we're not going to tell it the same way because it's just not going to be that engaging. We think it's awesome, but you can't tell the founder's story the way the founder tells it because we're not the founder.
Right. Right.
You
Right.
have to redo that. What's great? How does a story really work? There was a challenge and there was an obstacle, and then they hit the obstacle, and there's concrete things to storytelling that make people go what and get engaged, and you have to know what those,
Right.
and you have to follow. There's rules, and you got to follow them. I mean, screenwriters have been following the same rules forever and ever, and when they try to break out of it,
It often when you get the really bad movies.
right, it just they fall flat on their face, or Hollywood's not going to pick it up, and the
Yeah.
the reason is because we've been doing this for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Right. So we know we're hardwired for story. So you got to go right into that wheelhouse, do it the right way, the way it's always been done around the fire, since we were cavemen, right? That's the key. And if you can do it in that way, they're eating out of the palm of your hand. And the key thing too, we're in SaaS, you got to differentiate yourself. And your product is not going to differentiate from other products. And if you're relying on your solutions engineer to come in and knock their socks off with a demo, you're dead,
Yeah, totally.
right? You've got to build it up so by the time the solutions engineer comes in, this is solving their problem, solving their need, and and it's your job to prime that as a sales rep to where they're just eating out of the palm of your hand. Storytelling is going to do it every time.
I love that. And one thing that I thought you said was very interesting is you mentioned there's different types of stories. I think you said there's the hero's journey, which is sort of like you're putting your prospect in the hero's role, and you're the Obi-Wan Kenobi or the guider. You said there's an origin story. You said there's like a visioning story, like a future, maybe a future world story. You mentioned one other that I can't remember, but
Values in action, I think.
values in action. Yeah, values.
That is where you put your company, but that's where I usually put somebody in my company. I'm telling the story of my data engineer or my customer success manager and how they helped a customer do something. And then you throw in those values, like this is what our company stands for. When you look, every company writes those values out. You
Right.
need to look at them and go, okay, that needs to be in action. How are we putting these things in action? And how can I tell that story to a prospect so they get what our culture and all those things are? Not just we're so great, we're so awesome, we do this all the time, but more like, wow, we're people who really take care of the customer. We're people who really listen. We're people that value this, right? So I think those stories, those are harder to tell really well, but they're powerful because they make you different than a
Then,
SaaS company that's just
yeah.
looking at them as a sale that wants to get the sign on the line that's dotted, and they don't care about this stuff. And they may have a better product, frankly.
Right.
Every company I've ever been in, there's always been 3, 4, 5 people with a better product.
Wow.
Right. So you're not going to win. And those companies, I think, are you don't want to get into the price game, right? Price slashing, but there's other ways. You have to build value in other ways. And if your prospect sees you as the solution that can solve their problem with all of that you do really well, then you win. But if you leave it to the bells and whistles and the product and the software itself, we're going to get crushed because there's some really good software in this space that's infinitely better than we offer. But it's complicated. It's, whatever, right? There's other things to it. You got to get it off of the bells and whistles and the product features, which is really hard for SaaS.
Yeah, I think that those are great piece of advice that you've learned from your experience. And so just to kind of recap, I love it. It's sort of one way you can help your team become better storytellers is there's 4 stories you need. You need a hero's journey for your prospect. You need a value story for your company. You need an origin story, and then you need a future vision story. And you can probably give the bones of those stories to your reps, kind of teach them the bones of the stories, and then help them prep it. My guess is you probably don't want to
Everybody's got to make it their own. That's a really
yeah.
good point. Like,
Yeah.
you can't tell a story the way I tell it. You got to tell it like you tell it.
Yeah, exactly. So give them the bones and then help them learn how to tell it themselves. But my guess is that that as a manager, you probably need to give that to your rep, or they're probably not going to come up with all the sort of the scaffolding of the stories by themselves, or it might be a big ask for at least your sort of average rep.
Yeah, and they're not going to tell it well if they don't own it and they didn't build it themselves.
Right, right. I love that. Well, that's fantastic. Great, great, great advice on how to help your team become better storytellers. So just to wrap up, we have this segment where we kind of call rapid fire, where I just fire some questions at you, very quick answers. So first one is, what are 3 sales tools that you're most excited about right now?
Well, I mentioned conversation intelligence, right? I think
Yep.
that's the big one. I'm really excited about. I like video storytelling. I think the Vidyard Loom type.
Oh, interesting. For reaching.
Yeah, and they're in the early stages, and I think that tells this, storytelling ties in with that. And then these AI like Clay and these, tools that that personalize outreach at scale. You can tell it's in the infant stages, right? I get these emails all the time. I can tell it's quote unquote personalized. That's got to go to another level, and so I'm really excited to see how data optimization and personalized outreach at scale. That's going to be the name of the game, and whatever tools can really figure that out.
Right.
Are going to be powerful weapons.
I love that. What's your favorite sales book?
Well, I mentioned Predictable Revenue. I think I did by Aaron Ross. That's definitely one. Sales Acceleration Formula, Mark Robert's. Those are sort of the Bibles of SaaS. But the
I love that.
leadership book that I refer to most often is Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. I'm always mentioning something from that book.
Right.
And it was the book when I was coming up in sales, and everybody read it. Now I bring it up, and people are like, "What's that book?" I'm like, what do you didn't read like now it's like brand new again because nobody's
Right.
thought about it or read it and it's still just as fresh as the day. I mean, all those begin with the end in mind, seek first to understand, then
Yeah.
to be
Before being
understood,
understood. Yeah.
are just as relevant today as they were back then.
It's interesting. Stevie Covey's from my hometown, we still read that book where I live. But I agree with you. It's definitely not as like as commonplace in the general sort of sales culture as it was 15, 20 years ago. It seems like.
Exactly. So yeah, that's old wizards like me that we bring the we make sure those don't get forgotten.
Hey, those are, I mean, honestly, I recently, a few years back, I read The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker.
Yeah.
And, this book is very, very old. And I'm just like, this book is amazing. It's the best management book I've ever read. And it's 50 years old or whatever. And sometimes these principles are very durable. Sometimes people like to come in and try to invent new things, but it's the time tested stuff that, not always, obviously, there's things where the culture gets wrong, but some of these time tested things really, really work, to be honest.
Always do. And everybody's, I mean, Atomic Habits, right? Everybody's reading that now. That's just repackaged stuff, but it's done so brilliantly,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's nothing new. It's just done in a brilliant way, right? So,
I will say that is probably one of my favorite, more recent kind of books of
yeah,
that
me
genre.
too.
So that's a good one. What's your favorite sales quote?
Quote, if you can have everything in life you want, if you can just help enough other people get what they want. Zig
Oh, I
Ziglar.
like it. Zig
Another one of those
Ziglar, another
old
old timer. Yeah.
absolutely, man. That's the best I've ever heard. And it really sums it up, right? That's the name of the game.
Yeah. I love that so much. I grew up with my parents had some experiences where they kind of got scammed by salespeople, or not scammed, but just kind of hustled by salespeople that they
Yeah.
just became sort of like our core family stories. And it took me a while to unlearn those things. They bought like a Kirby vacuum and just had a terrible experience with the whole thing. And so
Right.
we kind of looked down on salespeople in my family. And I've since learned that those were bad salespeople. Great
Right.
salespeople, like you said, help people get what they want. And I love that framing of it.
Talk about the great stories, right? Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross, Tin Men, all those great old sales movies are about those kind of hustler salespeople. And it's hysterical to look back and see how sales came up as an industry. And it's a great
Right.
what not to do. All
Yeah,
those
exactly.
what not to do. So, but yeah, it's definitely, I think it's a profession. My son is, he studied engineering. Now he's going into finance and he's been watching this for a long time. And he like said to me the other day, he's like, you have a really noble profession, Dad. Like,
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. That's beautiful.
heard me on the phone back in the old days, driving around all the time. And he's like, you really help people. And I'm like, okay, you get it, right? And it
Yeah.
is. If you salespeople can take pride in it, it is in some ways the most noble profession in business because nothing happens without a good salesperson. I mean, you can have the best product in the world, but if you don't have somebody who can sell it, it's never going to get in the marketplace, right? And so it really is helping find the people that need it, that can solve a problem. And if you really take that high road, sales can be a great career, I think.
Amen. And finally, what was the biggest challenge you faced last week and how did you solve it?
Biggest challenge last week. Well, I'm going through the acquisition right now. So the biggest challenge for me is not to just scream and yell every time I see something wrong. Because it's like, you're back to just listening and absorbing, right?
Yeah.
Because I just want to go solve everything. I'm like, what are you guys doing? And of course, they've been doing this for 20, 30 years. So I just
Right,
need to,
right, right.
oh, that's really interesting. That's great. You did that. Have you thought about another way to, right? So
Yeah.
just sort of relaxing and taking my time again and not being so gung ho like I know everything and I can solve everything. I mean, I can see the things that need to be solved, but just be patient with people and, find the right time to pick your battles.
Right, right.
You can't always do everything you want to do when you want to do it. You just have to be patient and work. Working with people. I'm working for small SaaS startups. You can just do everything. I'm going to do this, fire these people, do this. You come into a big organization. It's like,
It's a different, yeah.
yeah, different mindset, mentality, and which is great. I mean, I'm fortunate where this company I joined, wonderful people, culture, wonderful environment. I just got to get acclimated again to you're turning a big battleship around instead of, flying off on a jet ski, right? It's like, okay, it's going to take some time, take some patience, and a different kind of challenge.
Well, I mean, that's a great application of a Stephen Covey principle. Like you said, seek to understand before
Yeah,
seeking to be understood. So
yeah,
it's a
that's it.
very good one in big orgs like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And all organizations, to be fair, right? If you can
Right.
listen first and then act, you're going to be far more successful. That's for sure.
Well, Jeff, I really enjoyed the conversation, learned a lot, and I appreciate you making the time.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. I enjoyed it very much.
If people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, right? Jeff Hicks, Hix is my last name. I'm one of the few there, so you can usually find me that way. And yeah, would love to help any way I can. I love talking about this stuff. I love helping people in their sales journeys. So if I can be a resource in any way, if people want to break into this industry, it's an exciting space to be. Tons of companies growing, and if you're kind of in a stale, been around the block, kind of getting tired of your industry, come on in. The water's fine. So reach out and find me, and happy to help if I can.
Amazing. All right. Well, great to chat, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jeff.